AI, it could be LLMs, it could be RAG, it could be, monitoring, it could be, eBPF, it could be tracing itself, right? But today, we're just focused on operations, not service strategy, not service provisioning, not even service support, which is all super important, but we're just focused on the 6 verbs of operations. So let's talk about it, because the idea here is that within each of the verbs, governing, auditing, documenting, licensing, etc., what we're doing is that we need to make sure that we understand whether we have manual processes with no documentation, or whether we are scaling up to like a defined process that's thoroughly documented, or even if we have like an automated process, which is kind of the ideal for most of us, versus a fully automated end-to-end process. That's what we're looking for. So just know that the idea here is that we want full, like, automated processes. If we can get to fully automated, that sounds great. That's what we're striving for. Now, to be aware, I've been around for a number of years. I think I started my career in actually 1996. I am all into the AI enhanced DevOps space. I have multiple certifications all over the place. And I work for a company called CodeCloud. Now, I'm not going to talk a lot about what CodeCloud does, because this isn't a sales presentation. It's really just to let you know we are the greatest DevOps training platform in the world, and that includes things like cloud, AI, and other pieces. So if you haven't heard of us, we actually do a good job. Our aim is to engage learners and to really give you the experience and the expertise you need. So that's going to be probably one of the few mentions, but this is what we focus on, is that we are all about training people in real world experiences around these technologies. That being said, let's hop into the first verb as it relates to operating any technology. So like, let's say you've launched Kubernetes and you've provisioned it and it's running and you've got the whole thing secured and it's just ready to go, right? You know how to configure it, you've deployed stuff onto it, you know how to distribute it, people know how to discover it, it's all good. What happens with the day 2 operations when it comes to how do I basically govern Kubernetes as an example? But this could be any service, it doesn't have to be Kubernetes. And before, you kind of roll your eyes and think bureaucracy, which I think most of us do, good governance is what lets you sleep at night, but it doesn't slow the business down so much that it can't deliver. So governance is really just the things that, keep services operating within whatever parameters you define. The idea here is that we're trying to prevent the breakdown of systems that are essential to the business. And we just want to make sure there's some operational excellence, right? So like, for example, if it's Friday afternoon and someone wants to deploy a quick fix to production, good governance says, hold up, let's follow the process. Has this been tested? Has this been run through? And that's kind of the traditional model. But if you've got all your testing and all your governance and all your checkboxes in place, then maybe you can do a deployment on a Friday and not have to worry about it. It's not about being the fun police per se. It's about preventing like Saturday morning disasters and weekend disasters, that kind of thing, right? So with that in mind, right, let's talk about some critical governance concerns. So governance's main job is to not add bureaucracy per se, which it seemingly does for most of us, right? It does seemingly slow us down. It might be useful. But what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to make sure that we have clear accountability and ownership for services, right? We want to make sure that we understand how we're going to check change drift inside the environment. Who made changes? When did they make changes? This is kind of part of auditing as well. We want enforcement of standards and best practices. So governance actually addresses no enforcement easily. When, cost and kind of technology sprawl just spiraling out of control without visibility, the deal is that we want enough control to make sure that we're not creating chaos, but not so much control that we are like tightening things down. Now, this varies widely depending on your industry. So, just to paint a picture for you, I once worked for a company that had 47 orphan services that were running in production, 47. Nobody knew who built them, what they did, or who to call if they broke. And the team that had built those services had left like 2 years earlier. And that's what happens without governance, is that there has to be not only some process for when people exit the company or when people onboard in the company or when a service is started and who manages it, but without some measure of like kind of governance around people, process, and technology, then your culture really suffers. And that's what this little checkbox is about. Now, there are ways to automate certain aspects of governance. There's tools like, for example, we could use service catalogs, like Backstage is an internal developer portal that's used for platform engineering. You could use something like Service Catalog with AWS as an example. And this gives us a governed, curated way to get access to services that are pre-approved for use. You can also throw in policy engines. Policy engines could be everything from OPA Gatekeeper on Kubernetes, or it could be security policy engines like admission controller hooks and pieces like that that prevents you from launching certain things in Kubernetes. Cost management is pretty self-evident. It could be things like kube cost or open cost, something that basically has guardrails about like when do things get outside of our standards. So whether it's a policy engine like OPA, or security engine like Falco, or a service catalog like Backstage, or a cost management system like KubeCost, the idea here is that the policies and standards that you want, there are engines that can help you enforce them. So the key benefits here is that you get clear ownership and accountability, you get automated policy enforcement, clear visibility and control into costs to a certain degree, and then, of course, consistent standards across the team. That's number one, governance. Not pretty, not the funnest, most fun attributes, not as fun as like provisioning or, performing or whatever, but a necessary aspect. You've got to have some kind of standards and operational discipline around your technology or service. Let's talk about number two, auditing. So if governance is basically the enforcement and the definition of standards, right? Auditing is the thing where you basically can prove, right? What you're doing here is you're proving that we think we're secure into like we know we're secure. We can prove it, right? And so, in that context, critical concerns that auditing addresses basically are, hey, we're failing compliance audits because we don't have any evidence that we're in alignment, like we're in compliance. Security violations like discovered way too late because, we don't know what the status of patching is or whatnot. A manual audit, by the way, eats a lot of time. So while it does take a lot of time to set up automated audit processes, they are very useful, not just when you are faced with an audit, but also when you want continuous auditing and compliance, they can be very useful. Again, I know that governance and auditing are generally seen as bureaucratic, but they can be very useful. One thing I'd love to know, and please place this in the Q&A or into chat, preferably chat probably, is that, how many of you have seen governance completely choke you or slow you down when it comes to deployments, right? How many people have run into that? Almost everybody I talk to has. So I would love to hear like, hey, I ran into it here on your, on a chat message. Now, there are tools that can help with this, by the way. Like your typical monitor, logs, and traces even can be evidence collection. But just know that even outside of traditional support and monitoring, you've got to take that evidence, those logs and traces, and you've got to like freeze them somewhere and put them in somewhere that they're searchable and can be audited on a continuous basis. So whether it's evidence collection, continuous monitoring, audit trails, or just automated scanning, these are great tools and examples of general buckets of tools that you could use. For example, you could use Drata or Vanta for evidence collection, like to pull like logs together, freeze them immutability. You can use things like Cloud Custodian for like, policy, continuous like policy enforcement. Splunk and Elk and other platforms can be used for audit trails and log aggregation. And then, just know that there are lots of tools out there that will do automated scanning to like SOC 2 or GDPR, or even scan your data for violations. And those are the kind of things that we're looking for when it comes to auditing. So we did governance, now we did auditing. And by the way, just to say this, some of the key benefits of auditing are what you would expect. We know we're compliant. We can reduce our manual audit preparation time. We can be proactive about detecting violations, right? And so this allows you to enhance customer trust, which is a huge lift when it comes to increasing both reputation, which usually leads to revenue. Now, that's governance. We just did auditing, right? Auditing kind of proves governance to a large degree. What about just general information about the system we deployed? Now, here's a question for everybody. How many of you have gone to search on something like Confluence and you're like, this documentation is out of date. I can't find the document that I just made with the thing in there. How many of you have had a horrible experience with Confluence search? This is the Atlassian Confluence, by the way. Yeah, okay. So I guess the question here then is that how do we document knowledge? So in the verbs of production, like having some documentation, sometimes it's self-documenting, like it's code that has clear comments on it, or maybe it's just self-evident because you can look at what the code or the domain language is doing and you can tell what's happening. But documenting really talks about creating and maintaining clear service documentation so that you can share it, that you can make sure that systems are understandable and knowable, and even operable, especially as teams change. So, documentation basically maintains those clear service boundaries. And like you can see here, there's like a clear like network diagram, right? It represents the complexity that we're dealing with, right? Without these kinds of like general documentations, it's like, how do we understand the systems that we're working on? We got to go in and poke around. But if we have accurate documentation, we can understand an entire system like reading a book. Now, problems with not having documentation, ignoring SpongeBob for a second, is that, the person who knows how this works is left, right? Incidents are taking hours because no run books particularly exist. Onboarding new team members takes months. Documentation's kind of out of date or unsearchable, which is one of the most common problems that I've seen across the industry. I was actually in a Department of Transportation space the other day, and they have tons and tons of documentation because I was having lunch with a buddy, and you could hear them like they could not find a single piece of relevant information for this service that has been in service for 20 years that wasn't out of date. And some of the other stuff was unsearchable. So just know it's like this SpongeBob meme of like, I got 1,000 pages of documentation and search can't find one. That's pretty common. I've seen incidents that should take like 30 minutes stretched to like 8 hours because nobody knew the fix from last time. Nobody knows how the system works. There's all this discovery happen. So some form of documentation capture is important at almost every level. Now, when we talk about tools for this, we talk about things like Confluence and wikis, and those are great because they allow us to collaborate, right? We talk about kind of immediate documentation, like, Markdown or ASCII inside of a particular like commit, for example, because we want to make sure that we have recent and up-to-date documentation at the time that changes are made. There's also kind of like other automation as far as like freshness, like, you could use like Jupyter notebooks, for example, are great because they show you exactly what someone did through the history and you can share those. There's also kind of like knowledge graphs that allow your search and your versioning to also be transformed into kind of like discoverable kind of relationships. That's also super important. And, a lot of the industry standard tools that we use are unfortunately third party, except for like wikis. But most of people now I find out are just focusing on putting their documentation in code and putting associated readmes in the repositories with the code in question. Now, does that limit the scope of things like run books or other larger strategic documentation? No, for the most part, that goes in Confluence or some other kind of wiki. By the way, notice that those tools that you are familiar with, they have evolved significantly. So like even Confluence, which I think could still use a lot of work, has extra searchable features now, including text summarization and other pieces. I know people are probably like sick of hearing AI, kind of like I am sometimes, but there are some enhancements that have been very useful in those spaces. That being said, the key benefits of documenting what you're doing with the service are pretty slim but significant. Faster onboarding and incident resolution. You can reduce the loss of tribal knowledge. You get a livable, searchable knowledge base, which is absolutely fabulous. And then you get these empowered kind of self-service teams because these teams can now go and actually use the documentation without having to wake somebody up or find out if someone's on vacation. So we've done governance, we've done auditing, we've done documenting. Now we're moving on to yet another one, probably the last of the abstract verbs, called licensing. Now, to a certain degree, this is the hidden landmine in many operations, right? It's not really just about open source either, by the way. As you know, commercial licensing is a big deal because we've got to manage software purchases, we've got to manage renewals, we've also got to manage sourcing. So many of us are using open source licensing. How many of those have commercial restrictions to them? How many have provisions in them that say you can't do this, that, or the other, or you must give attribution, right? So oddly enough, you have to stay like legally compliant when using components as well. Because the concerns here I was just laughing at Cheech and Chong. The concerns here basically are you don't want to get surprise audited, especially for commercial software. Some companies that will go unnamed are really bad about surprising you with an audit, and then the next thing you know, you're out of compliance and you're paying like $80,000 in licensing costs, right? Paying for unused licenses is just as bad a problem as having unlicensed stuff that you are using. And then, of course, using that unlicensed software, unknowingly, that kind of falls a little bit into the governance and auditing pieces, right? But no visibility in software costs, because these licensing costs, whether they cause you to have to take extra actions or they cause you to spend dollars, businesses have to know that. So tools in this area mainly fall into the line of like asset and license tracking, like, things like ServiceNow's like SAM module or Flexera for asset tracking and optimization. There's also commercial like dependency scannings, like SNCC will do this, SNYK, so will FOSSA. And then there's like other compliance tools like Black Duck, which will search for the injection of different open source and commercial licenses. Black Duck is pretty cool, actually. And then, of course, just general usage analytics. How many Oracle databases are you running? How many MS SQL databases are you running? How many, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? How many Rancher instances are you running? Luckily, Rancher will actually tell you, so it's kind of nice. Benefits of having tools as it relates to licensing are things like you can get to 100% license compliance, right? You can, basically optimize your usage, because if you're paying for 50 licenses and you only need 40, that's very useful in many cases. You can avoid being exposed to things like legal violations. That's very useful. And of course, it can also just help in general, like strategic vendor management. I had a buddy recently who asked me to help him with a Oracle to Postgres conversion. And oddly enough, Oracle gave them a tremendously deep discount because they found out that they were moving a lot of their workloads to Postgres. And that actually took some pressure off the migration, but also gave the business some new capabilities that Oracle was willing to throw in, right? So don't take that as like, oh, let's call up Oracle and see what we can get. But when you know what licensing transitions and items exist in your environment, this can help with discussions with vendors as well. Okay, I'm checking in to make sure I didn't miss any questions. Looks like somebody raised their hand and had a question, but I didn't see anything posted in either the Q&A or the chat. So please feel free to chat and share away. Okay. Just know, by the way, there will be questions at the end, so the floor will be open at that point in time. We are recording this session, so it will be shared with you. And oddly enough, you can get access to previous recordings as well, and we'll talk about some of that here in just a minute. All right, so we've governed, we've audited, right? We've documented, we've licensed. So what do we have left? Like, what do we do now? So let's talk about maintenance. Now, if you were here for any of the previous webinars, you know that maintenance is an evolution of configuration, right? So that was in the first set of pillars. The previous webinar talked about configuration. Because configuring something because you're going to launch it and you need to like set a certain number of parameters is an ongoing process. Even some cases with a mutable infrastructure like containers or golden images, you have to configure some things and then redeploy, right? But you're still having to configure things. And so maintenance means basically, how do we patch? How do we update? How do we change? How do we maintain the technology or the service in question? Like, I think all of us know that, Kubernetes releases updates on a regular cadence. And so you don't want to fall, 3 or 4 revisions behind, especially if you're on a cloud provider, because they'll actually charge you for extended support if you fall 3 versions behind in most cases. And so maintenance is an extremely important verb, because if you deploy Terraform, by the way, you might have to do a whole lot of maintenance. If you deploy Kubernetes, there's a whole different set of maintenance. If you deploy a database, there's maintenance to be done. If you use Customize or Helm, there might not be that much maintenance. So really, this verb activates depending on what technology you're using, just like any of them do, right? If you're using a tiny technology, there might not be any maintenance other than just updating it every once in a while. But just to say this, there actually needs to be a process even for that. If you're on Terraform, let's say you're using OpenShift 4.18 and 4.19 has just come out, right? How are you going to evolve your current OpenShift to the next OpenShift? How are you going to evolve your version of Helm to the next Helm? You might say, well, I'm just going to update the version of Helm and let's just see what happens. That's a little unintentional. So I know that sometimes it may seem like these maintenance, like these verbs only apply to big systems like Linux or Kubernetes or databases or whatnot. They actually still apply to tools that you're using as well. Because I think all of you may probably know that you can change a version of something and wreck an entire system. So, being intentional about maintenance is absolutely essential. So what problems does this attend to, if you will? So security vulnerabilities. So security, by the way, was part of the previous set of verbs. Configuration and securing were part of those verbs. So you need the combination to get to maintenance, right? You need to be able to understand how to secure the system, and you need to be able to change the system, which is what configuration does. Those two upstream verbs lead to this verb, which is maintenance. And that's how you do security patches. Also know, I don't know of a single system that doesn't degrade over time, especially if it's on a cloud provider. Because remember, they're always updating their hardware, right? But it gets bogged down with logs, memory gets dirty, like all this other stuff. I mean, we're not running 20-year-old running systems using Unix like we used to, right? I don't even know that we want to go back to that world. But performance does degrade over time, so you got to be able to change and shift things. Systems can be running unsupported versions, and it's like now we got to upgrade, right? Because that's a huge path. And this whole thing of like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it until it catastrophically breaks, that's kind of not appropriate thinking. Let me just say this to you. Any man-made digital system, unlike a tree, which can like heal itself given the right conditions, any man-made system will degrade over time. So if you do not maintain it, it will degrade. It will eventually just fail. If you maintain it, then you can keep it going. But if you don't touch it and you don't maintain it, then it's going to fail at some point in time, usually catastrophically. So that's why this verb is pretty important. There are lots of tools for this. Chef, Puppet, Ansible, CloudFormation, ARTs, right? All the stuff. And that's just for configuration management. You can actually extend, for example, Terraform. You could use bash scripts for configuration management. I actually had Claude Code the other day just create an entire production-like cluster for me from scratch, just to see if it could. And then I had it upgrade it, which was kind of cool, actually. Now, I'm just going to say this. I actually ended up getting Claude Code to write a bunch of Ansible for me because I didn't want to rely on Claude Code to do the updates. But I have to say, even Gen AI can do some updates now. Don't do that in production, by the way. We are not advocating that. I'm just saying that we are evolving probably towards that. There's also things like Renovate, or even like GitHub's like Dependabot, which will give you like updates on dependencies. Like, I need you to update this version, or move this forward. There's a bunch of like cloud native tools like Systems Manager and others for like patching for like AWS. And of course, for lifecycle management, there's lots of great tools, but like I would say arguably the biggest one for like Kubernetes is actually operators. Like, that's great for the container lifecycle, great for how, adding in DevOps logic inside of most systems. So there's lots of great examples there. Yeah, sorry, just checking questions. Now, the benefits of getting maintenance correct for your service or your technology or your system: fewer vulnerabilities and downtime, better system health, right? Proactively preventing degradation, super important, right? It's funny how if you deal with things when they're tiny, they don't snowball into these big, massive things. And then, you get to kind of do automatic routine updates, right? It's really straightforward. Now, I do have to put in just a little bit of a plug here, so bear with me for a second, is that, CodeCloud is known for kind of their in-browser labs, right? Just know that at studio.codecloud.com/labs, there are free labs, for example, for Ansible, if you've never like touched Ansible, or if you want to touch other things like Terraform or some Kubernetes, there are actually free labs out there. So you can go and actually play in browser with a system that's going to guide you through a set of instructions, low cognitive effort, right? So if you haven't touched maintenance tools, you want to get your hands on some, or you just want to touch Kubernetes, just know that there's stuff out there to touch. Okay. So we did governance, we did auditing, we did documentation, we did licensing. We just did maintenance. What's the last one? Because Michael, you said there were 6. And 6 there are. So the last one is performing. Now, like governance is like a big bucket and goes with auditing, and documentation and licensing can kind of like all fit in there. And so they kind of like relate to how you track and define standards on the system. Maintenance is a derivative of, like we said, security and configuration. It's kind of this evolutionary thing. Performance. Performance is the last of the operational verbs. And just so we're clear, it's basically number 20. So there's like 19 verbs that came before this one. So there's a reason for that, because performance is basically like optimizing your capacity planning and performance management to make sure that your services basically can meet customer needs. That's really what we're looking for. So this is scaling up, scaling down. This is meeting SLAs. This is all the stuff, right? Now, performing is important because we don't want services crashing just because they've, hit some measure of load, right? We want to make sure we have capacity for growth and response. We don't want to over provision resources because we don't want to break the bank making things. Because if we had unlimited money, we would just make everything the size of that Titanic and be like, hey, here you go. Go do something amazing. It's like, I just created a system that can handle like 1 million users and you only need 10. That's what we would do if we had unlimited capacity, but we don't. So you can't do that, right? And so, you've got to right size the capacity of your system to meet customer needs and be just a little above it. And I love this cat picture here because it's like, I want it fast, I want it free, I want it redundant, and I want it to anticipate my every need, right? So, just to say is that that's what customers want. So you're kind of doing this juggling act of like, well, I'm going to give you enough resources to make you happy, but I'm not going to give you so much that's going to make the business unhappy. We've got to kind of balance this whole performance capacity thing, right, that we're doing with costs. Now, tools for managing performance, there are so many, right? I mean, I would say like tools that do like application performance management, like, Datadog and New Relic. And by the way, some of that kind of starts to lean into the support verbs, which is why those verbs are also downstream. But things like load testing, auto scaling, like Carpenter, the traditional Kubernetes kind of like HPA, right? The new dynamic resource allocation that Kubernetes, I think it's 133, is about to come out with. And then even outside of capacity management, there's also performance testing. And I'm a big fan, by the way, of performance profiling, like, even if it was at the JVM level, but also like chaos engineering, where you go in and you like, add load basically to a system to see how it scales, or break things within a system to see how resilient it is. So those are all kind of key parts of the kind of performance verb. Now, the benefits are significant. We get reliable scaling, we get cost-efficient resource use, we are continually optimizing, and of course, we get like basically like peak-ready performance, which is what we want. We want our performance to stay just ahead of customer need as it goes up and down. So, big deal. All right. So we've talked about governance, we talked about auditing, we've talked about documentation, we've talked about licensing, we've talked about maintenance, and now we talked about performance. Awesome. Let's talk a little bit about putting it all together for a moment. So at the beginning of the call, we told you that this was the third webinar of 3 that we've done where we've pretty much dived into the verbs of production. And this is the operations pillar. We did the provisioning pillar before, and we did the strategy pillar before that. And you might say to yourself, Michael, I'm on a team that only does like a portion of that. Totally fine. Because here's a question for each of you, if you don't mind typing in the chat, or Q&A for that matter. What like section do you primarily spend your time in? Are you supporting and troubleshooting broken applications? Are you doing day 2 maintenance and operations of existing systems? Are you the people who provision the systems? Or are you the ones who do strategy because you're a little bit more on the DevOps architect side? So basically, to give you back them again, are you doing strategy mainly, provisioning mainly, operations mainly, which is what we're doing now, or are you doing support mainly? Would love to know. Let me know. So Meanwhile, let's talk about an assessment. So ideally, oh, good. Okay, wait, someone actually said strategy and architecture. I'm caught completely off guard by chance. I would love for there to be more answers. That completely blew my mind. You might be the first, Srinivas, that I've seen, right? Um, so the idea here with the assessment is that, remember, in each of the verbs, we need to assess whether or not we're doing things manually with a very documented process, or we're starting to get into automation, right? And so that's levels 1 through 5. So know that with each of the verbs, we've got level assessments that we need to do to figure out how mature we are. Ideally, you are at least at level 3, manual but documented. Level 4 is actually preferred. Level 5 is the nirvana. You are deeply automated at level 5 across all the verbs. So that would be the preference. So just know is that you need to evaluate your organization against the 6 elements, find your weakest areas, and then figure out how to correct it. I do want to offer a caveat though. Like for some systems, your company is going to say to you, well, we don't really care about tracing. So like, let's just save that until we actually need it, because we don't have the money or the time for that, right? Because, resources are always a problem. And I don't just mean people, I mean time, money, people, that kind of thing. So know that even though you are aware of each of the verbs, you may not have to answer, yes, we have this solved for each of the verbs, because the company may not care about that. Now, I guess, I've kind of asked you like what your biggest operational challenge is already. So, that's why I was asking about like kind of the support pieces. I was curious, like which of the ones that you fall into. So the idea here is that you want to use what you now know about the 6 verbs of support, operations in this particular case, and see and look at the previous verbs and see like what is your capability, maturity as it relates to those 6 verbs. So your homework would be just assess your team against these 6 kind of operating elements. We are going to email you an operating assessment template, and that way you can identify your 3 improvement opportunities, and then maybe figure out like what's your roadmap for addressing these operational gaps. And by the way, you might even go back to provisioning, and you might go back to strategy and just make sure that you've answered those questions as well. It probably is worth noting that we are going to talk about support, right? And support is going to include the actual supporting itself, recovering, which is all about reliability and resiliency as well, monitoring, logging, and tracing. So there's only 5 verbs left out of the 25 in the next September preview. So just know, by the way, all the resources, if you look at the webinar link below on this particular slide, which will be provided to you, and I think probably it's going to be posted here in a second. Just note that that's where you can get access to all the templates and resources that you need. So immediate actions, we're going to let you download the operating assessment template, register for the September workshop if you're interested, and just know CodeCloud has a Discord server. Tons of us are on it. Feel free to ask questions. If you catch me on there, you can find me pretty easily. Just look for Michael Forrester, and I will answer your questions if I see it. If I don't, tag me, and I will be glad to answer it. Good. All right, so remember, there is a foundational session that talks about all these verbs in overview. We've also got a strategy session, we've got a provisioning session, and now you've attended the operational session as well. And a reminder, this is just part of a bigger thing, 25 verbs of production, talking about how you can build skills, but also checklist your delivery of any technology into production. This is really for engineers and operators, but we find that leaders use them a lot to kind of assess, like, does my team actually have the skills to scale underperforming? Do they have the skills to configure Kubernetes? They'll ask themselves those questions. So again, part of our workshop, feel free to register here. This will be provided to you, but know that we'll be providing templates. There's a bunch of links here. Like if you want to close the gap around your DevOps practice, you want to talk to our sales team about, any things related to that, we're here for that. The June and July workshop toolkits are listed right there. And then we will be sending you links and engagements for a governance framework, the Ansible automation playbook that I did for Kubernetes. I'm just going to share with you all so you can just have it for free. It does assume plain vanilla Kubernetes, so don't worry. If it's AKS, EKS, or GKE, you probably need to do something else. And then a little bit of a performance optimization checklist and a little bit of a canvas about how to do assessments, right? How do you assess your operational capabilities? Okay, so remember, we're for CodeCloud. We do in-browser training. We also offer comprehensive kind of semi-customized portfolios for certain topics. We focus mainly around DevOps and DevOps related to AI, including MLOps, and DevOps related to cloud in all of its glory. We cover GitOps, like Ahmad was just telling me about, monitoring using Loki, Promtail, Prometheus, all that, Docker. We do all of that. So, all right. Floor is now open. You can ask me any questions you want related to this or pretty much anything around DevOps. If I don't know, I'll just tell you I don't know, but it is shocking the amount of things that I actually do remember. Some questions that have come up, by the way, is like where the framework came from and otherwise, but otherwise the floor is now open. So ask any questions you want of someone who is 12 times AWS certified, worked for AWS, worked for Red Hat, worked for, a lot of companies, Google. So let me know. Floor is open. Let's see. So someone asked if the labs that I showed were free. Those are free labs. We do have some content that's available probably at that location. We also have some playgrounds, like one playground around Kubernetes that's free. We have 3 tiers of membership, which you can see on our website, along with a 4th that adds kind of AI if that's something that you want. We also have enterprise business section as well, but we cater to both consumers and businesses. Just depends. So some of it's free. The higher features, obviously, and classes are all paid. Since we actually provide you live environments in cloud, those pieces are paid because, they charge us, we charge you, that kind of thing. Good. Okay. Let's see.
Somebody has another question.
I saw that. What will be the future of platform engineering? Don't see much traction in the job market. All right, that's a good question. So it's weird because what's happening right now is that you're seeing a lot of the push of AI where people are kind of reaching for the promise of AI. And the reality is that it's just not quite there yet, but we all want it to be. Well, some of us want it to be. Not everybody wants it to be. But the funny thing is at the same time, the population is declining. I know that sounds weird, but if you look at global numbers, like population is slowly declining, more people are getting older and they're retiring. And so what's interesting is that there's kind of this push-pull kind of thing happening where you see the markets kind of shifting where like, wait, AI can do like all this cool stuff and it's a force multiplier and that's cool. And then you see like people are like, we're kind of like retiring, we're kind of getting older, we're kind of like stepping down. And so you're like, Michael, I just asked you about platform engineering. Why are you talking about that? Well, the bottom line that I wanted to say is that the issue here is that there is a future for platform engineering. It is actually the single most requested certification that the CNCF has ever seen, even more than Kubernetes, right? And so I was in KubeCon London back in March and talked to their head of learning and development, and they actually said on stage that platform engineering was the most requested certification. And so as you know, they actually have platform engineering associate. So it's like a beginner's level certification for platform engineering. We're about to release a course on it actually within the next 6 weeks. And it's basically just a beginner's level platform engineering certification. They have a 2nd tier platform engineering certification, an engineer certification coming out, I want to say within the next like 6 to 12 months. So the reason I share that is because they got more requests for that certification than any other. And I would say that the desire to lower developer friction as far as like cognitive load is higher than it's ever been. That being said, we are seeing like the job market get a little squeezed, especially in the middle and the beginning, right? So like you want to kind of like bump up your skills, get invested, and you want to learn how to use generative AI in your workflows as soon as possible. So if you haven't touched Claude Code, or if you haven't touched things like Cursor or Zed, if you were to ask me, I'd say like, if you have ChatGPT, stick with that, but maybe move to Claude. If you haven't used Claude Code is absolutely the best. It's runs on your terminal. It's spectacular. We've got a course coming out about it. And I say that not just because I have a course coming out about it. I'm telling you about stuff that I use every single day. So like, just know that this agentic kind of terminal based, like the AI is doing things for me in the environment, that is the future. And there are like places for all of the engineers in that space, because remember, platform engineering is about creating a product for a customer. That's not necessarily something that AI is going to be able to do, because you're going to have to connect with the customer, understand their needs, talk to them. AI is going to be a partner in that. So recommendation is try to see if you can inject AI in almost every aspect of your workflow. You're writing Terraform files, pull up Cursor and let Cursor help you write Terraform files. You want to use Claude Code to write Terraform files? That's what I do personally. I think that's a great idea. Learn how to use these AI tools and partner with them, because they are going to eat implementation and they're going to be part of your world, and you want them to be part of your workflow and you want to understand them. So get the basics of LLMs, the basics of machine learning, and then just start using those tools every which way you can, right? And my recommendation is stick with one tool and get really good with that tool, because they're all evolving and they're kind of like equal, and just do that, right? And if you want an IDE, I probably would use Cursor, but there's plenty of other recommendations. Klein is also another great tool. So yeah, there's options out there. I don't remember who posted that. It looks like it was retracted, but maybe it was answered. Yeah, there we go. Let's see. Question. I'm junior DevOps. I need some career advice. Can I ping you on LinkedIn? Absolutely. You can also just ask me questions. That goes for anybody here. If you catch me on LinkedIn, it's michael@codecloud.com, or you can ping me on LinkedIn. I'll be glad to answer questions. If enough of you ask me for something, I'll probably just say, hey, come join me on the Discord server. Let's start a little group and just have a conversation. So I have mentored probably at this point, maybe over 1,000, maybe thousands of people since I have been teaching and leading since 2016. So by all means, hit me up on LinkedIn. I'll be glad to answer questions. Slide into my DMs, as people say. Okay. Well, we are at 10 minutes to the top of the hour. Floor is still open. Just want to check. Make sure that all questions have been asked. Good. Well, I just want to say thank you for attending. I know that, the operations piece is not necessarily the most riveting of topics, but it is extremely important and a key piece of understanding the 24 verbs of production. We appreciate you being here. Otherwise, I'm going to hold the space for other questions. Yeah, just let me know. Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here. Team's going to hang out for just a minute, but we are going to officially close the session in case anybody else has another question. Otherwise, you're going to see some collateral from us. Go check out our website. Go check out the free labs. Hit me up on LinkedIn. And we'll see you for September 18th, if I remember correctly, as our next one. But go sign up on our website for the other webinar. We're going to cover the last of the verbs of production, talk about next steps. Thanks, everyone.
There's one more question coming in the chat.
Oh. Didn't see. Oh, there's a couple other questions. In the future, will there be more prospects for SRE than SRE SE? I don't know the answer to that one, Rosie. I really don't. So for software engineer versus systems engineer, I don't actually know if that, I do not know the answer to that one. SRE is kind of got a really mixed bag. People love it and they love to use it as a title, but most people don't actually practice site reliability engineering. At least not as it was defined by Google, right? As far as like toil, reducing toil, incident management, all that stuff. So I don't really have a good answer for that one. That one I sincerely don't know. Good. Any Red Hat labs or courses coming up? So we have a Red Hat course already. We maintain one of the certifications. Other than Ansible, of course. I would say that Red Hat has their own kind of ecosystem that they're really closed about, especially now that IBM has gotten them. So I don't know that we have any current plans. We have been looking at things like Lightspeed and some of the other kind of like Gen AI based stuff, but no official announcements yet. An advanced Argo CD course. So Raman, if you go to codecloud.com and scroll down to user feedback at the very bottom, it's like very, 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 very bottom of the page. You can actually vote for a course. I have noted it here. but we don't currently have any plans for an advanced Argo CD course because no one's asked for one. And so we've just provided the basics. There is an Argo CD certification that I think is about to come out. That's a little bit more advanced than our basic course, but if you have specific asks, go on our user back page and just like ask, or go to our Discord and make a little bit of noise, and it will be thrown into the priority queue for evaluation. Now, just know that a certain number of people have to ask for it before we'll go after it. But you know, if a lot of people have asked, we'll get there. Let's see, something that shows extensions plugin development for the Argo CD course. I don't think that even with the certification, there's some honorable mention, but I don't think we have any built-ins for that. But yeah, like I said, if you go vote on our user back, it gets noticed. We reread user feedback constantly. So it's there, you got it. Let's see, how can a DevOps team support users with limited experience in Terraform and Git? Oof. So Jimmy, a lot of that comes down probably because some of the kind of concepts around platform engineering. So basically what you want to do is you want to orchestrate as much as you possibly can, and kind of give people paved roads for how to use Terraform. You might even consider like running a portal instead of actually giving them raw access to Terraform, and running a portal that has like pre-created kind of Terraform scripts, and all they do is replace the name of their application or the container that they source from. Sometimes that kind of service catalog, which is one of the things we just talked about in governance, is better than giving them raw access to tools. And you know, that can even be true for Git. Like you can just say, hey, take your zip file, do it here, it unzips it, automatically commits it, you know, does the branches and the merge, all the stuff, right? Like it sometimes, in order to make it easy on users, you got to take away the complication from the users and give them a paved road. This is why platform engineering, by the way, is considered to be kind of the next evolution of DevOps, is because it basically puts the customer back in infrastructure. And so, you know, I would consider that approach of like, how much of this can we just automate for the user and give them a very slick, simple interface? Because remember, any application that lowers the friction for solving a problem, that application is going to win. I mean, who knew we had a problem with taxis until Uber came along, right? So, you know, let's see. As a DevOps, do I need to do AWS practitioner as my company wants solutions architect associates? They offer me to do practitioner in the solutions. So I would say this is that, Ahmad, you're going to learn everything you need to learn to do practitioner in order to do the solutions architect associate certification. So there's no reason not to, actually. And it's going to build your confidence, and it's going to give you a 50% coupon on the solutions architect associates exam. So you're going to have to learn everything that's already in the cloud practitioner anyway to get to solutions architects associates. So I would just go ahead and do them both. Not only that, once you take the solutions architect associates, it automatically refreshes and extends your cloud practitioner certification because they're considered to be in line with each other. So, and not only that, it's going to build your confidence. There's no reason not to do that. I would do cloud practitioner and then go after solutions architect associates. Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah. Oh, that's good. And just so you know, I'm going to share that with Mumshad. He's going to love that. As far as, thank you for your compliments. Right, hands down the best platform for DevOps, SRE, cloud, MLOps. Thank you. Appreciate that. We're trying to listen, and we're trying to build exactly what people need. So thank you for the compliment.
We have also a couple of questions from LinkedIn Live, Michael.
Ah, okay. I would like to find out if I study Linux, I must learn AI. So that's a good question, actually. So I would like to find out if I study Linux, I must learn AI. So I would say this is that Linux is soon going to be managed by AI. And I know, like, Michael, how can you predict the future? I've survived Kubernetes, and I survived cloud, and I survived mobile devices, and like all this new technology has come over, you know, last decades. AI is arguably more invasive than anything we've ever seen. I mean, how many times have you used a tool and your grandmother's also using a tool, right? So AI is going to get everywhere. And one of the things that people are looking for AI to do is this agentic AI, and they're wanting to use AI to eat as much implementation. Now, I got to be careful with this because it's still valuable to learn YAML, Terraform, Kubernetes, to learn the systems. but you're going to learn implementation, and then you're probably going to end up doing more architecture, more alignment, more customer stuff, and less deep detail fixing of like YAML files. I'll be frank, I'm not going to miss YAML when it goes away. But to answer your question, is like, do I have to study AI if I'm actually just focused on Linux? And the answer is unfortunately yes. Learn Linux, maybe even use AI to help you. But no, there's already tools that run in the terminal that will manage the complete Linux system for you, do all the troubleshooting, initialize services, look for problems, run kernel crash dumps, run eBPF. Like, it'll do it all. I stood up an entire Kubernetes cluster on a bare metal Ubuntu set of boxes using Claude Code in another system, and it just logged in and just did the thing. So are you going to need to learn Linux? Yes. Are you going to need to learn AI in addition to Linux? 100%. So start figuring out how to inject AI into your workflow. That's what I was saying earlier. You have to, because I just want to say this, and you heard this here first from Michael Forrester, is that implementation is going to lessen, if not eventually go away in the next 10 to 20 years. Imagine if all you did is you went to the AI and said, hey, stand up 3 Linux boxes. I don't even care what the flavor is. Just make they're super secure. They meet ISO 27001 compliance, and I need them FIPS 140-2 compliant. Done, right? It'll even be simpler than that. You'll just say, hey, can you just launch an application? And it'll already know your company standards and what your security levels are, and it'll just do it. So we're probably 10 or 20 years away from that, but we are progressing rapidly towards that reality. So if you're learning Linux, inject AI into your equation, learn how to use it, even if it's just the consumer services. Will CodeCloud offer any data ops courses or Apache Airflow courses? That's a good question. We do not traditionally play in the data space. Like, we've got Kafka learn by doing, right? And we've got some database courses, right? But generally, operators don't manage deep kind of orchestration workflows around data and machine learning, right? So I can't say that we'll never do it, but our main focus is around anything DevOps related, like AI. And we have a lot of programmer stuff too, like LangChain, whatnot. But yeah, I don't know. Data operations, we're kind of seeing, because we think that AI is honestly probably going to eat that before we even get there, right? So what about AI ML roadmap, sir, in CodeCloud platform? So I believe there is an AI roadmap. There's tons of AI courses. There's definitely ML courses. Like I just mentioned, like the fundamentals of ML ops, and of course, LangChain, LangGraph. What else do we have? Not Pedantic. PyTorch is, I think, also out there. I guess my point is that we're not super focused on machine learning. There are some machine learning adjacent pieces, only because we're finding out that DevOps people are having to do a little bit of machine learning if they're supporting machine learning teams. But mostly what we're focusing on is either things that are consumer AI, developer, a little bit of developer AI, but really the ML ops, KHGPT, kubectl AI, the tools that enhance the creation of Terraform and Helm charts and stuff like that, because that's where everybody's headed, is that implementation is slowly being, both for software engineers and also for infrastructure engineers and DevOps engineers, you're seeing that shift. So I don't know that we have a clean AI ML roadmap yet, but remember, you can go vote. You can go on our homepage, scroll down to the bottom, give user feedback, and you can say, hey, I want a course on this, right? So, yeah. Good. Any exam practice guides that you recommend? Well, we have fabulous mock exams, which I used to work for AWS. I wrote most of the questions for most of the exams. A lot of them are still in use. So our mock exams are like really good. If we don't have it, I do have other options, but hit me up on a DM if you want the answer to that. I would say that in general, we have mock exams for practically everything, including certified Kubernetes, CKS, CKA, CKAD, stuff like that. So good. Does CodeCloud have plans to create a course on DevOps architecture and systems design? So Raman, that's actually something we've been actively talking about off and on, is that if implementation is slowly going to start to diminish a little bit, who's doing the architecture? Because traditional like systems and solutions architects aren't necessarily focused on the operational architecture. I know that sounds weird, but like there seems to be like a missing gap there. So there's been some talk about that. If you want to vote, again, go to our homepage, codecloud.com, scroll to the bottom. But noting that we have been thinking about systems design and systems thinking, to kind of enable people to adapt to the kind of the ever increasing consumption of implementation by AI, how do we then get into systems design and how you orchestrate between systems? So I don't really have a good answer for that. The answer is we don't have one yet, but we've been thinking about it. So if you want to vote, we'll do it. Being a DevOps engineer, should we transition to ML ops or learn generative AI, like building agents and MCP servers? What should we learn in AI being a DevOps engineer? So Priyanshu, so combine, if you're doing DevOps now, put AI into your workflow. If you don't know the fundamentals of machine learning, do that. If you don't know the fundamentals of generative AI LLMs, do that. Like, learn the fundamentals. If you find that you're super interested in any of those, go deeper. If you want to stay in DevOps, you need to figure out how to inject more AI into your workflow. If you don't want to stay in DevOps and you're interested a little bit more in the ML ops side of things and the AI ops, which I'm going to use loosely, deepen your study of machine learning and deepen your study of, you know, everything from RAG and context and MCP servers and A to A and all that stuff. It's not going to hurt anybody who can hear my voice right now to learn what LLMs are, learn what RAG is, learn what MCP servers are, learn a little bit about A to A. It's not going to hurt you to do that. So, you know, just want to take care of everybody who can hear my voice because I serve people. That's what I do. You want to get into this AI revolution. It's not going away. As a matter of fact, in 3 to 5 years, it's going to be the only thing that we're doing. So do it. When you say learning AI, do you mean learning AI tools or the core AI for developing ML models? Okay, so to answer that question, if you're doing DevOps and you want to stay in DevOps, then learn how to inject AI tools into your systems. Stay in DevOps. Learn DevOps architecture, right? That's your whole path. If you want to do ML ops, you're going to have to learn a little bit of machine learning, and then that's going to branch out into both machine learning algorithms and models and running AI models. You're going to have to do a little bit of both. You're mainly going to play in the space of how do I run, scale, and keep these things alive. The 25 verbs of production are great for LLM models, and they're even great for ML models. So that's what I'm talking about when I say learn AI. If you want to go learn how to be a data scientist or an AI engineer or scientist, which I think is amazing, that's a whole different set. But remember, the power of focus is what's going to allow you to evolve in your career. So pick a path, go down it, see how you think about it, how you feel about it, what the prospects are. But there's no world in which AI is not injected into your workflow. So whether you stay DevOps, go to ML ops, or decide to become a data scientist, you are learning probably at least some machine learning and a lot of AI fundamentals. So that's what I mean by that. Struggling with YAML and unable to find a proper documentation where can I understand it better? Oh, Med. YAML. My recommendation, get on ChatGPT or Claude 4.1. Put on the thick reasoning models. By the way, with the new ChatGPT, you have to say think deeply about this. And have it teach you about YAML because the documentation is horrific. And YAML is a two-step shuffle nightmare that just is a gift that keeps on giving, right? I've spent more time debugging YAML in the last 5 years than I ever have JSON. So I would say get in like that, or go take the YAML course that we have. But like, use your tools to just make sure that you're practicing as much YAML as possible until you get it, right? Because that's the only way to get around it, unfortunately. We all struggle with YAML, just in case you're wondering. Is there anybody who's like, I don't struggle with YAML? I would love to meet that person. Yeah. Let's see. Other questions. I got a title Kubernetes thanks to Cloud. Oh, in Tanzania. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, good job. All right. So I want to recognize that it's 6 minutes after the top of the hour. You guys have asked so many questions. This is great. Thank you. Remember, we've got all these things, wikis, link, all the stuff to stay connected with us. We've got a Discord server. You can catch me at michael@codecloud.com. We have another webinar September 18th. You guys have been fabulous. We'd love to talk to you again. Catch me in the DMs, catch me on Discord, catch our team. But meanwhile, I'm going to go ahead and shut it down just to take care of people who have been hanging out with us. Thank you for all of your questions. Thank you for being here. We will see you next time.